Yeah.
Okay, we are live.
Just a second. Just a second. I've started the process. Hopefully we are live. I am taking in the participants now. Okay.
Yeah, so meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. I think we will give it another 1-2 minutes for all the participants to join in. कितने waiting में हैं?
Sir, share the screen till that time. Share that screen till that time till we start the program.
Yeah.
Or should I share it?
No, I am sharing this first. Okay, able to see?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys are live everywhere now. Please go ahead.
लेक्चर शुरू हो गया
Lecture शुरू हो गया. I request everyone to please switch off their mics.
I'll do that.
Yeah.
Okay, now the presenters and the panelists can unmute themselves. Rest are unmuted.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, Indiva.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Devkant, all the participants entered. I mean, they entered.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. We'll be starting with the grand rounds. But before that, I would request all of you who are present, who are viewing us, to please join UOC. It's a very simple process. You have to log into our website. There's a green color button. Become a member. Click on it. You get the details. Then going on to today's program, grand rounds is a modality, or it's a methodology of teaching which started way back it was started first by Sir William Osler, and his idea was a bedside conversation with the residents. The main aim was to teach everyone, the residents, to provide a mentorship to these guys. Somehow over the period of time, grand rounds fell into a gray zone and practically stopped. We are trying to revive that tradition and trying to discuss cases over here. So the main idea and motto of this session is going to be there'll be 2 or 3 speakers in each session where they'll be presenting the cases which they have managed in a particular fashion, and then we'll have a powerful group of panelists who are experts in their fields at this current moment, and hopefully they will continue to be so. They will discuss the various aspects of the management of the case and how it could have been handled better, if at all. So I'll start with the introduction part. The moderators. I'm me. I'm Dr. Indiva Mishra. I'm currently the proprietor for Bhala Netra Super Speciality Eye Hospital, and I'm the treasurer for UOZ right now. Dr. Devkant Mishra, I don't think he requires any kind of introduction, but he is the secretary for UOZ India, and of course, he's an international figure. Moving on to the panelist, Dr. Jatin Asher. He is a senior cornea specialist. He is trained from AIMS and then LVPI, and currently a very successful practitioner in Bombay. His eye hospital is named as Mumbai Eye Care. Then moving on to Dr. Kunal Mandlik. He is a cornea specialist in the department of course, cornea in Arvind Eye Hospital, Pondicherry. Dr. Aditya Pradhan is again an anti-segment specialist. He is working with Disha Eye Hospitals, Kolkata. Dr. Aarti Heda is an anti-segment as well as glaucoma specialist. She is currently a consultant in KK Eye Institute, Pune. Dr. Karan Bhatia is the assistant professor and consultant of cornea, cataract and refractive services in Regional Eye Institute of Ophthalmology, Sitapur. Last but not the least, Dr. Aditi Ghosh. She is currently working with I7 Hospital in New Delhi. So I would request the first speaker, Dr. Rajat Jain. He is an anterior segment specialist and is following in the footsteps of his mentors and his family members in Jain Eye Hospital in Delhi. I would request him to upload his presentation and move ahead with the case. Dr. Rajat Jain. Okay, Dr. Rajat Jain, are you there? Okay, he is on mute.
I'm joining.
Can be unmuted?
I'm joining.
Yeah.
Yes,
He's
yes.
there. Yes. Mission accomplished.
My screen is my slides visible?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Indravir, and thank you, Dr. Devikant and other team for allowing me to speak on this topic today. I'll be discussing a case which I managed somehow in the past few weeks, and we'll discuss if in the present scenario of COVID, we have a better way of managing it, and I'll be very happy to have the inputs of my seniors and colleagues on the esteemed panelist. So we have a 45-year-old man who came to me first on 2nd of April 2020, that's around 4 weeks back from now, a month back from now, with a history of more than 6 months of duration, a waxing and waning course. He had a history of pain, redness, decrease in vision over the past few months, which had worsened in the past 1 month. His vision had decreased further in the last few days. He was on a he was on a cocktail therapy, which included antibiotics, antifungals. There was no history of any prior steroid usage as per the prescriptions provided. At presentation, his vision was around 3 meters. He had more of a scarring, not much congestion of the conjunctiva, more of scarring of the cornea, not much infiltrate, but a central round perforation of around 2 millimeters in diameter, as we can see in the clinical picture provided, which was just inferior to the visual axis. Now, this perforation was unepithelialized. Otherwise, there was no epithelial defect around it. And there was no leak. Seidl's test was negative. The forced Seidl's was also negative. There was iris plugging the perforation. AC was very shallow, but formed. IOP was very low, low to moderate. So a clinical diagnosis of herpes simplex virus necrotizing stromal keratitis with corneal perforation was made. He was advised to undergo tissue adhesive with bandage contact lens with AC formation. However, the patient was lost to follow-up, and then unfortunately, the lockdown had started already. And the patient being far from more than 250 kilometers, there was no public transport available, so he couldn't afford a private taxi, and he didn't come to us for follow-up. Then he came to us on 23rd of April, that is about 10 days back from now. He had already undergone a surgery elsewhere that was 1 week back from his presentation this time, where he had got applied the tissue adhesive as shown in this picture. Now, I made a clinical diagram just to illustrate the points because the clinical picture does not show very obviously a few points. There was a lot of TA, which was there on the surface. The conjunctiva was congested, as we can see. But there was something, a whitish tissue in the center with 4 corneal sutures radiating around in the periphery. So what I presume it to be is probably a nodding membrane or a tenons. But the AC was still shallow, almost no AC at all. There was no leak. Pain was very minimal, but a lot of redness was there. So this is the presentation as of now. He had presented to us first on 2nd April with a 4 weeks history, with a 6 month history worsening for 1 month. Then 2 weeks later, he underwent a TA elsewhere, that is around 17th of last month. Further, 1 week later, he presented to us on 23rd. And then 1 week has gone by till when we operated upon him. So my first point of discussion was, in this present scenario of lockdown, where we don't have any tissues, there's no travel support possible, what is the best management for this patient? Should we wait and watch for the AC to form? It's 1 week that the AC has not formed. The AC is shallow, almost flat. Should we let it form adherent leucoma? Should we remove the TA, apply the fresh TA and try for AC reformation? Or should we do a therapeutic PK? Now, considering me, what choice I would have had in this patient was, if there was no lockdown and I had tissues available, what would I have done would be that I would keep a tissue standby, remove the TA, try to do a non-peak, non-keratoplasty management as far as possible. Otherwise, do a transplant in the same sitting. But the problem was, due to lockdown, there were no tissues available. The last I checked with the AIIMS eye bank, they had 2 glycerin preserved eyes, and the frequency of usage was 1 in 2 days. So in the further 2 days, those eyes would have also finished. So what I did was, basically we performed this surgery on 31st, that is around 3 days earlier, 1 week after he had presented to me the second time. So we removed the TA, and that is what we found underneath. Appeared to be a tenons with the 4 sutures intact. Again, that was removed. What we found now was that the size of perforation was around 2 to 4 millimeters in size. And surrounding thinning was around 5 to 4 millimeters in size. I have harvested a larger tenon patch graft from the superior nasal fornix, applied the fibrin glue, and secured the tenon patch graft with cross sutures on the cornea. Now, 2 sets of cross sutures were applied, one in this direction and the other perpendicular to it. This technique has been described in literature very well. The problem was, as soon as I again formed the AC, the tenon did not hold through and gave way. Now what next? Cornea was not available. So this is what we have now. Now the tenon has been tried and is not working. AMG, I didn't have to try a multi-layered AMG. So what we do, used is the top hat of the DSEC, which was done a month earlier. Now I know it is not ideal, it should not be used, but I always keep the top hats of my DSEC grafts when I do the surgeries for about 6 to 8 weeks. So the top hat was available with me. The central 4 millimeters of the top hat was refined. On-table consent was taken from the patient that we'll be using a tissue that's 1 month old, but that is the best we can do for you right now. And the 4 millimeters of round tissue was secured with 8 sutures. And at the end, the AC was formed. This is the clinical picture which has been received by me on WhatsApp today by the referring surgeon. He doesn't have a photography system, so he has clicked the photograph of the patient on camera photo and sent it to me. He says that the AC is formed, the vision is fine, and the inflammation is decreasing. So that is what I have to present. So what we have tried to do is manage eye, and the question is what next? What do we do next? So what I would like to this patient to have is a formed AC for the next 3 months. Then because the opacity was inferior to the visual axis, probably leave it alone, or do a optical PK under acycloid prophylaxis. With this, I would end my presentation, and I would request panelists and other people to share their experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rajat Jain. That was fantastic and a difficult case indeed. So I would request Dr. Yogesh to upload his videos, and in the meantime, I would like to ask Dr. Rajat Jain, what do you think, when would the tissues will be, when can we actually have access to them? And do you think in the current scenario of Corona, we'll be able to procure tissues in the
the problem
near future?
Is twofold. Yeah, the problem is twofold. The first and the foremost is that most of the tissues we harvest are by the people convincing the relatives to give the tissues. That is hospital retrieval program.
Yeah.
Now all our people who are going to convince the relatives, they are very scared, and we also don't want them to go to the hospitals. So the first problem is going to convince them to give tissues. Second problem is transportation. The public transport and the commercial transport is not still working. So even if suppose harvesting starts in Hyderabad, LVP Hyderabad or something, we can't have them here. So the only eye bank which probably somebody like me can ask tissues is the local eye banks, that is Shroff and AIIMS in Delhi. Somebody in major cities can take tissues from their own eye banks, even if it starts. But I am not sure in the current scenario it will start in the at least next 2 to 3 months. It won't start.
Okay.
So it's a problem.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Yogesh, are you ready with the presentation?
Okay. Meanwhile, as a medical director of one of the eye banks, we have a directive from EBAI not to collect any tissues at the moment because we are not routinely doing any COVID testing. And as of now, we really have no idea whether COVID is going to be spread through the tissues that are collected. So there is a directive. So despite having, because transportation to another city is a different issue. When you're going to collect, most of the times you would go by the eye bank ambulance. So that's not an issue at all. The problem is because of the COVID situation and no testing being done for COVID. So that is the reason that there's a directive that has come to all eye banks not to collect any tissues till we have a further notice to do that. So that is the reason we don't have tissues. And glycerine preserved corneas are actually very not much available even today in most of the places. At the National Eye Bank at RP Center, that's where they preserve it. But like our eye bank, we don't have any glycerine preserved corneas that we ever preserve.
Sir, what about the presence of coronavirus in these tissues? I mean, there are multiple reports coming in now that in tear samples and aqueous humor, they have found coronavirus. So how valid are they?
So that's the whole reason. See, since we don't know what is the risk of transmission via the corneal tissue, so until that is not certain, all over eye banks throughout the world have stopped collection of tissues at the moment. I mean, till we really don't know what is the future with it, we really don't know what is going to happen. As of now, it's a very big gray zone. I really don't know when it is going to start.
Also, the volunteers are also at risk if they go to collect the tissues. That's also a problem.
See, most of the hospitals are right now working only with the COVID patients. Yeah, and COVID patients. So, and voluntary deaths also happening. People are more concerned about the cremation issues that are happening. So at this point, we really don't know how this is going to shape up, because we still need to formulate how would we, because we cannot stop collecting tissues till we don't have any alternate source of transplantation. We'll have to possibly look at how would we really want to do for tissue collection, eye banking to go ahead in the future. I mean,
Okay.
this is going to be really difficult for the next few months.
Okay, I think we'll move on to Dr. Yogesh. He's ready with his presentation. Dr. Yogesh, are you there? Are you audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so can you just share your screen and proceed with your presentation?
Right. The screen is... Hello?
Yeah, Yogesh.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. So,
okay. His screen visible? Yeah, it's there.
Is it visible, right?
Yeah, it's visible. Yeah, please proceed.
Good evening. So, I'll be presenting a case of it's open globe injury. So, he was like a 15-year-old boy, and he suffered a trauma while playing with his friends, trauma by tennis ball to the right eye. And he visited our hospital with the complaints of pain, watering, and diminution of vision. So on inquiry, he was wearing spectacles during activity, and the glasses broke at that. He was wearing spectacles during the activity, and which broke at the time of the accident. So on examination, his visual acuity was hand movement close to face with the peer accurate, and his left eye vision was absolutely fine with the glasses. This is his ante-segment photo. Actually, he was very uncooperative for the slit lamp examination. This photo is intro of image. So this is like his lids and external adnexa was fine. There was no any trauma, but there was small subconjunctival hemorrhage present at the 6 o'clock, and there was a full thickness zigzag corneal tear which was extending up to the limbus, and the AC was totally flat. Fortunately, there was no iris incarceration. The pupil was mid-dilated, and the rest of the details were not visible because of this edematous cornea. I checked his which was brisk in the left eye, and we ordered B scan for the to look for the presence of any foreign body or any breach in the posterior capsule or any presence of hemorrhage in the vitreous cavity. The examination of left eye was within normal limit. So informed consent was taken, and we explained the entire procedure and then possible complications post-operatively and chances of infection and ophthalmitis, everything, and we took consent. And pre-anesthetic checkup was done. Unfortunately, he was not fit for the general anesthesia because of he was wearing dental braces, and his mouth was not opening for the intubation. So we planned for the corneal tear repair under mild sedation with local anesthesia. Local anesthesia in the form of Van Lint for the paralysis of orbicularis oculi, and 2 ml of Peribal was given for the surgery. So first step is to identify the tear, how it is extending, look for the foreign bodies. Since AC was totally flat, I secured the angles of the tear first. And after securing angles, there was a little bit room for the formation of AC. So I injected visco through the corneal wound itself to push iris back. And after injecting visco, I took side port at 2 o'clock. So this is how I injected visco within the AC through main wound. And then I took side port. And the further antechamber manipulation was done through this side port. So all the sutures are taken at the 90% of the depth. After thoroughly closing wound, the AC was given with the help of saline, and the wound closure assessed with the help of cotton bud itself. The watertight apposition is necessary. I prefer to keep air bubble in antechamber, especially post corneal tear repair. Bandage contact lens was given for the smooth epithelial growth over the wound. So this is a post-op 1-1 picture. Wound is very well opposed, AC is formed. Post-operatively, its post-op period was uneventful, and medication was given in the form of topical moxifloxacin 6 times for 2 weeks. Then topical steroid was given from the day 1 itself, since the wound was not infective, and steroid was given in the form of 6 times for first 3 days, and tapered over a period of 1 month weekly. In atropine was given, and CMC 1% drops were given for the 2 months. And topical aqueous suppressant timolol was given for 2 weeks. Since it was open globe injury, I have given oral cefixime 200 mg BID for the 5 days. All corneal sutures were removed in OPD itself on subsequent follow-up over the period of 3 months. So this is a picture of after the 3 months. The cornea is pretty much clear with a few linear scars. His unaided vision was 20/200, and we gave him a scleral contact lens trial. Vision was improved to 20/50. And with proper counseling and training, the patient is currently using scleral contact lenses comfortably. So my take-home message for this case is careful history and clinical examination is must. All principles of wound suturing should be kept in mind, but few cases require tailor-made approach. Minimal tissue handling with restoration of normal relationship of tissue is key to success. So maximum the tissue handling is there, then there is a chance of more development of scar. And then keep calm and give your best shot for the surgery. Thank you. Yeah, I would like to ask panelists one question, that is there any other way that you can think about this surgery, like primary wound repair, like any other form of suturing, or can we go ahead with the optical keratoplasty in this case?
I think Dr. Aditya Pradhan can take up this question.
Yeah.
Stop sharing, or you want me to share? Keep it sharing my screen.
You can keep it at the last photo where the scleral trial was mentioned.
Right. This one?
Yeah. So, Dr. Yogesh, this was very beautifully managed by you. So, regarding the surgical technique, the suturing, I wouldn't say anything new. It was very wonderfully done, sticking to the usual principles mentioned in the textbooks.
Yes.
So with this, after post suture removal, and the child is enjoying a vision of 20/50, am I right? With the scleral lens?
Yes.
So I would not go for any form of keratoplasty in this, because there are many factors. Because one is the ability of the patient. He is a child.
Yeah.
So he is dependent on his guardians to come for follow-up to your clinic on a regular basis.
Yes.
Once you change the actual cornea, now he is at a lifelong risk for rejection, infection, and all those factors which come with a keratoplasty.
Yes.
If the vision would not have improved beyond a certain point, even in spite of a scleral lens or whatever else, one way would have considered a keratoplasty. But with a scleral lens, and if the patient is educated enough on how to take care of the lens properly, I would not touch this cornea for a keratoplasty. This is a perfectly acceptable result.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Yogesh. That was a wonderfully managed case. I think we can move on to discussion. There are a lot of questions coming in from the chat group as well as on Facebook. So I think we'll take up the first case by Dr. Rajat Jain and then move on to your case again. So Dr. Rajat Jain, can you just put up your the picture of the initial presentation?
Yeah.
So first, I would like to ask, was there any other way you could have managed this case, or would any of the panelists, Dr. Karan, can you take up this question? I mean, was there any other way you could have managed this case?
In scenarios that particularly when he's done a beautiful technique where he's, use the cap of a dissect lenticle, but that's not always available. So sometimes what I do is that I use a surgical drape. So you cut that surgical drape and you apply a little bit of glue, and for not such a large perforation, but you can apply a little bit of glue, then again the surgical drape, then again the glue, and don't let it completely dry, and then put the BCL on it so that the BCL sticks to the glue. And in such a way, what happens is that BCL also gives an additional support. The other way, what we have done in the past is actually use like the paper part of the drape. And when nothing is available, no tissue is available, and it's a little bit large on that. So what we have done is you've cut that part with slightly, pointed edges, and I've put it inside the cornea, like create a tunnel inside and put it inside as a temporary procedure, and then put glue and then the BCL, and it is that patient actually did well. I have a search photo. If you want to me to show, I can show it. Let me look for it. That technique. Just if you allow me to share the screen, I can show that photo.
Yeah, Rajat, can you unshare it?
Can I make a comment first?
Yes, please go ahead.
So
you're one of the panelists.
So the first things first. See if the patient had the presentation with the patient had with me. If the patient had, if I had done the primary TA BCL, the primary BCL was done elsewhere. So I would have just applied a small amount of TA, tried to remove the iris from the side port, and if the iris was not able to come out, I would have just left the iris stuck to the perforation and on top of that a TA. In this case, what I believe has happened is, in trying to remove the iris very, very aggressively and something, the perforation size has increased. Now, because the perforation size has increased, it has gone from beyond the 1 millimeter to 2 millimeter limits of it getting sealed by a TA. Now, yes, putting TA directly on iris is not advisable, and I would never do it. But if it is at the cost of increasing the perforation, I would have just put the TA on this. Now, the second part is how I will manage when the patient has come to me. As I told earlier, if I would have had the luxury of having a tissue, I would have definitely straight away gone ahead with a therapeutic PK under a cover of the antivirals. But because I didn't have the tissue, that is where something had to be done. And Karan rightly said, we have done drape BCLs, we have also cut the BCL part and stuck it over the perforation. And
okay, can I ask everyone to please mute their mics? Excuse me.
In the way, you can also mute them. As a host, you can mute the other people's mics.
Yeah. Yes.
So probably Karan can share. I'll stop sharing
Karan,
my
no,
screen.
no. The host is Dr. Devkant right now. It's his account we are accessing.
So Karan, you can share your screen now. I've stopped sharing it.
Yeah.
Yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we are done. Yes, please. So I think we were hearing Mahabharat, so we can continue with the discussion right now.
Yeah, so Karan can share his screen now. I have stopped sharing the screen.
Yes. Dr. Karan.
While that
Karan, are
happens,
you there?
can I make a comment, Indivir?
Yes. You are all our, you are our teacher. Please, you can go ahead.
No.
By all
Please,
means, you
nothing
can
like
make
that.
a comment.
I would have possibly handled it in a different way, considering that the patient had come on the 2nd, which was already a lockdown period. And in the first photograph, we see that the superior AC is quite formed. Okay. And this being a viral, I would have possibly just done a tarsorrhaphy. This patient was on a cocktail therapy with antiviral, antibacterial, and antifungal. So this possibly is a reason why the epithelium is not growing back. I would have done a tarsorrhaphy, kept the patient on lubricating agents, and given him oral antivirals and just observed him, not done any surgical intervention at that point of time. A plain tarsorrhaphy with copious lubrication and oral antivirals would have taken care of him. Let it form an adherent leucoma. We can take care of that later anytime, because see, if the AC is formed nearly in almost 90% of your areas, with only a small, would not really risk in terms of having a glaucoma in future. I would have not intervened surgically at all other than a tarsorrhaphy for this patient, and kept him on lubrication and observed him for the time being. Anything beyond that, I think, is too aggressive at this point of time.
Okay. Dr. Karan, you there?
Can you see this now? So this is what I was saying. So what we had done that case this time here, nothing. So what we had put an intrastomal drape, like kind of like this. This was more of like a paper cardboard type of a thing, where some pointed edges, and we put it inside. We tucked it inside the stroma, and then as a result of which the iris, what Dr. Rajat was saying, was not in touch with the glue, and then we applied cyanoacrylate glue and then put a BCL. This is an old picture when I was doing my fellowship. So I remembered, so I just shared it.
Okay. Dr. Aditi, would you like to comment?
Yeah, regarding Karan's, I think with the present scenario of no tissues available to us, we have to think about something out of the box like Dr. Karan did. And as far as the management, if it would not have been the lockdown, I would have planned like Dr. Rajat only, would have taken up the patient to OT and, applied the TA and glue BCL and AR maybe for tamponade, and not manipulate the iris a lot. I agree with him. And maybe I would have started the antiviral, oral antiviral cover.
Okay. You think that would have been helpful?
Yeah, I think I would have started it.
Okay. Dr. Aarti, would you like to comment on this?
I think it was wonderfully, it's a wonderful case for the discussion. I think I would have stick to the tarsorrhaphy, and I would have just observed the patient.
Okay.
Considering the fact that patient might have underlying viral pathology, I would not have interfered anything surgically.
Okay. So reformation, you think, would not have been a choice in case when the iris incarceration had happened?
We can still wait and observe and see. Even if the AC is very shallow, we can take care of it later as a second step.
Okay.
So I'd like to make a comment here.
Yeah, please.
I would differ with Dr. Jathan in this respect, because it's a lockdown situation and the patient from 250 kilometers away can't show to me after 3 days. So if this was a local patient who would have come to me after 3 days, little bit of AC being formed in the superior part, I would definitely have waited. First things first, I have not done the TA in the first place. Okay. But that was my go-to choice. Even if I would have done a TA, because the patient can't come to me to show after 3 days. Now the surface is broken. There is a epithelial defect. There is a propensity of the infection which can go inside, and the patient can't come to see me at least a week or 10 days from now. So I am a little bit hesitant in leaving the patient like this with a tarsorrhaphy on, because the surface is broken. If the iris if the perforation was epithelialized, I would definitely not have touched the eye. But because it was not epithelialized, I would still probably go in and do a TA on it. Probably not too much fiddling with the iris, but would still apply a TA because it's open.
Okay, and Dr. Jatin Ashar?
Yeah, for Dr. Rajat, it's managed case. It's beautifully managed. The planning that you showed in your presentation is really nice. But I have one question over here. Was it the globe? Was it soft or was it tight?
IOP was low to moderate. IOP was very low to moderate in both the instances. But the Seidel test was coming out to be negative. I tried to find out if there's a leak. It was coming out to be negative, but the glow was very low. But the IOP was very low.
So one question I have over here for everybody over here is that, when there's already a tissue adhesive there on the cornea, there's a BCL there. So how will you be checking Seidels at that time?
We can't check.
That's what.
No, it is more to do. It is more to do with the first presentation when there was not a tear there. The Seidel.
Okay, but as you had said, the size of the defect would have, or the tissue loss area would have increased over. Definitely would have increased. So in such scenarios, since even I absolutely agree with you that since the globe is a little bit on the softer side, it is always better to intervene right now, and moreover in today's scenarios, particularly when patient follow-ups. And I deal with these kind of patients a lot, where they don't come for a follow-up for 10 days, 15 days, even a month.
I just have one comment. Maybe can we try an ultrasound after the second scenario to see whether any CD is there? After the second time, when the patient comes to us, we cannot assess the Seidels. Very gentle ultrasound. BCL is there, glue is there.
We can try that, but then if the AC is shallow or flat, anyways we have to form the AC. So probably it would not have changed my management. Dr. Jatin, what do you say?
I would still stick to what I had thought, because he was on cocktail therapy. The thing is that itself is a big hindrance for epithelialization. Tarsorrhaphy, lubrication in case of necrotizing viral work very well. Even if I was to see the patient after 10 days, I would have still done that. Because if there is no Seidels, that means there is very less chance that the infection is going to go in. If you say it was plugged with iris, that's another good point. I mean, I would not have done anything surgically. Even if there was no lockdown, I would have still observed the patient with just a tarsorrhaphy. Because see, cocktail therapy itself is a big hindrance in such cases where the surface is really bad. And you cannot
no lockdown, I totally agree, but lockdown probably. That's okay.
I wouldn't change my management in either case. I would have, even if I was to see him after 10 days, I would have still done the same thing.
I think the patient would have been much more comfortable with the tarsorrhaphy. I'm not taking any sides, but yeah, I think the tarsorrhaphy would have made the patient a little more comfortable when compared to the tissue glue and the BCL.
No, I would have done the tarsorrhaphy even in the second instance when you operated him. Along with whatever you did, you should have additionally done a tarsorrhaphy. That's what I would say. I mean, even whatever you did, that was fine at that point of time. See, your second time intervention absolutely was perfectly fine. Because had I been in your place, I would have done the same thing when he presented you in the second visit. But I would have additionally done a tarsorrhaphy at that point of time.
Point taken.
Yeah, so just like our panelists, most of our viewers are divided on the plan of management. Many of them support tarsorrhaphy. Many of them are supporting Dr. Rajat Jain's methodology. Yeah, Karan, you want to say something, please?
One question for everybody over here. So when we have a case like this, so you got any ulcer, let's say not just a viral ulcer, any ulcer. So when do you plan, to remove this is for the benefit of of the audience that we have over here, that when do you actually plan to remove the cyanoacrylate glue? Question number one. Question number two would be that if when everything is healed well, vascularization, everything is done, you remove the cyanoacrylate glue. The second part is when do you plan for a optical keratoplasty? So anybody can take that up.
Dr. Kunal, I think you are facing a lot of cases like these in Arvind Eye Hospital. What would you do in such a case?
Considering the scenario given by Karan or Dr. Rajat's case?
I think you can take both of them one by one.
Yeah. Okay. Considering the Dr. Rajat's case, I would have gone and taken the patient in OT. And as he has done, I would have done either Tenon's graft or AMG because we have our eye bank and we have AMG at your hands. So I would have done that. And in the first instance, I would have tried with tissue adhesives. If it was stable and AC was forming well, then I would have given it a time. Otherwise, I would have taken for Tenon's graft or AMG. And Karan's scenario, can you repeat, Karan? What was your scenario given?
I had said, when do you remove the cyanoacrylate glue?
Okay. Normally, cyanoacrylate glue automatically gets loosened once it is applied, and means I have seen many cases in which we have applied cyanoacrylate glue. It automatically gets loosened. That time, mostly when the cornea gets re-epithelialized or the stromal tissue gets formed, automatically the glue loosens, and we can see the position of this thing, perforation.
Approximately, it's about a month's time, I guess.
Yeah, at least. It takes at least 1 month.
4 to 6 weeks, yeah.
There are some signs to see as well. Dr. Rajat, can you take that up? What are the signs that you see that?
Yeah, so what normally happens is once you apply the glue is just like a Fevikwik. It will just hold the tissue for some time. Under that, the epithelium will grow under it from all the 4 sides. What happens is when the epithelium grows, the tissue adhesive, it leaves the surface and tends to come up. So if the perforation is very small, what you see is around 4 to 6 weeks from the application of the glue floats under the BCL. You can just remove the BCL and the glue is already off. If the perforation is large enough, you sometimes have to, muddle with the TA. But the point here is, don't muddle it too much, because when you should never remove the TA, because if you remove the TA, the tissue, the stroma will come along with it. You'll have to reapply it. So don't remove it, just muddle it and see if it is moving. If it is moving, remove it. If it is not moving, place the BCL on and check further after 2 weeks. And regarding whether to do, how should we go about doing a optical transplant? See, once the glue is off, I would, if the patient is not one-eyed and he is not only dependent upon this eye for vision, if the other eye is fine, I would probably wait around 2 to 3 months with probably lubrication and steroids in case of virals, and see how small or how deep a scar he is getting, how much vision he is getting, and then probably decide later on how about doing a transplant. If the patient is only one-eyed, that is the same eye he is having vision and he is dependent upon vision on that eye, I probably would, if the vision is the perforation is very central and having a deep scar, I would probably be inclined to do a optical iridectomy than a transplant. But if nothing else works, it's a deep scar, optical iridectomy will not work, do a transplant under explained prognosis after about 2 to 3 months. Yeah.
I think most of us will agree on what Dr. Rajat has said. Are there any differences over here?
Just to add to this, what Rajat has said is perfectly fine. Not every scar needs a transplantation. That is what you have to understand. If the scar is peripheral, even if it is one-eyed, I would not touch it. And with that, if the patient's education level is fine enough, like Yogesh's case, you can definitely go ahead with a scleral lens or a RGP trial and see the visual potential before you go ahead with a transplant and change the scenario forever. There are a lot of factors involved in the success of a transplant, least of which is your surgical skill. It's basically the compliance of the patient with the medications, the ability of the patient to follow up with you, the socioeconomic status, a lot of factors which influence the success of a transplant. So I would not be in a haste to, go for every scar with a transplant. So if the perf is like peripheral, it's a small thing. And there is another concept which I was discussing with Sayan that day, that many of these scars, even if they're not like bad adherent leukomas, apart from that, they do tend to remodel over time. So we have to basically wait at least for 6 months to see how the density of the scar is reducing over time, and then finally take up a decision of a transplant, if at all, if the visual axis is affected and those other factors.
Many of these adherent leukomas eventually land up with secondary glaucoma. So I think the glaucoma specialist can smile about this comment from Aditya. There is one question. In case the glue is not available, so how would you manage the case, Dr. Rajat? Because there are... Yeah.
Let me just add to that question, because I was coming to that question only. Yes. Particularly, glue is not available, and also that is one scenario. And the second scenario being when it's a very large ulcer. Particularly in COVID times, when you don't have any tissue available. So what are the options that others can use?
See, Dr. Sangwan used to tell us, suppose आप operation कर रहे हो और earthquake आ जाएगा तो आपको क्या करना है? So first thing is save the life. Second is save the eye. Third is save the vision. Okay. So in the scenario when we don't have glue or we don't have tissues or anything, first thing is to save the eye. So somehow you have to close whatever hole there is, you have to plug the hole. Now the least of all options I would take is Gunderson's flap. You can do it if you want it. I've never done it in my life till now. Fortunately, I have not had the chance to do it, and I won't intend to do it unless there's an emergency. But yes, you can do that. But you can also do a pedicle conjunctival graft. If there's a perforation in the periphery, just take a peripheral patch of the conjunctiva, hood it over the perforation and suture it. If it's a central perforation, if glue is not available, you can take a thick tenons, suture it on the cornea. But as I showed in my case, sometimes it doesn't work, because when you start forming the AC from the periphery, it just blows it, because it's not a tensile. It doesn't have a tensile strength, so it just gives way. But yes, all these things can be tried. But yes, I'll tell you one thing: glue costs only 500 rupees, and it's freely available. And the least you can do is keep 1 or 2 glues in your refrigerator. The expiry date is long enough; it won't go waste. And if it is available, it's a very good tool to have it in your refrigerator. It's a very good thing. But yes, you can do a lot of things. I have to make one more comment on my case.
Yes.
See, the long-term prospects, when a case comes to me, as a doctor, I know is patient ke liye what is the best I can give it to him, and what is the best for him. Patients don't realize what is the best for them. They would always everybody would want 100% vision, but you can't give 100% vision always. So suppose I have chosen for him that for him optical iridectomy will be the best. I will counsel him from day one like that only. If he comes to every visit, "Arey Baba, aapka to bahut acha ho gaya. Your eye is now saved." So now he just forgets about his vision from that eye and thinks about that the eye is saved, and slowly and gradually build upon that counseling. So as a doctor, you have to decide what is best for the patient, because the patient don't know. They will always want 20/20 vision. Obviously, everybody wants that. But then you decide and do counseling based upon that.
Okay, there is a comment by one of the viewers. Can you use facial lata instead of tenons?
Never used, and I think it's a very probably a very deep-seated. It's a very elaborate surgery for that. You'll have to harvest facial lata from the thigh, and never used. Dr. Jatin, any views?
I would say using a tenons is much simpler than why you want to go in for facial lata. You can do a Gunderson's, which is a simpler procedure than to go.
See, I'll answer this. Facial lata is a acellular tissue, or it's a cellular. I don't know. It's a acellular tissue. It's a fascia. It's a acellular. No? So what benefit you are getting from that tissue is just that it will close the perforation. If it's in the periphery, you can anyways do a Gunderson's flap. It will incite vessels, but it will at least close the perforation. If it's in the center, doing a facial lata, I've never done a facial lata. Probably the person who's asked can do it, but I don't know. If it's in the center, you can try. Acellular tissue will definitely be better than the cellular tissue.
I'll just add one tip, and I think then we can move on to the next case. Yes. Is that when you're doing a conjunctival pedicle or a conjunctival hooding or something, then you have to have that size has to be 40% more than the size of the defect, and that's about it. And I think we've had a wonderful discussion. And Dr. Inder, I think we can move on to the next case.
Yeah, we can move on to Dr. Yogesh's case. Dr. Yogesh, can you get your first slide, please, where you are showing the tear?
Tear, okay.
Yeah, and Dr. Kunal, I think you have handled tons of cases of corneal tears in Arvind. You think you could have managed this case in a different way?
Is it visible?
Yeah, Karan, Aditi, is it? Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Yeah.
The tissue looks pretty edematous. Dr. Kunal, are you there? I think Kunal is hungry and has gone for supper. Okay, would Dr. Aarti like to take up this thing?
So let me first congratulate Dr. Yogesh for wonderfully managing this case. Maybe I would not have done a B scan in this case, assuming that it's an open globe injury.
Okay.
And regarding your suturing technique, I think I was very convinced. What you have done, I would have done the same thing. I want to ask you one question. Is there any role of intracameral and intravitreal antibiotics in this case?
See, actually, I'll answer first about the B scan. Since this was an open globe injury and there was no iris incarceration into the tissue and globe was not that soft. So we did a gentle B scan just to rule out any presence of intraocular foreign body or vitreous hemorrhage or the breach in a posterior capsule. And so that we can explain, since one visualization method is there, we can show the parents that what is the prognosis and what will be the prognosis. Since CT scan is the ideal choice for the imaging, for that time it was not available because of the other circumstances. I did just whatever available, the B scan with a gentle thing. Second question, that intracameral antibiotic, yes, it has definitely a role, but since this case is not an infective, I have not given intracameral antibiotic. So there is no harm in giving intracameral antibiotic. Rather, actually, this case is almost 1.5 years ago, 1.5 year old. But presently, yes, I am giving intracameral antibiotic in like old open globe injuries, like those cases which are more than like 12 hours or 16 hours old cases. I'm giving intracameral antibiotics.
Okay. Do you prefer intravitreal antibiotics in such cases, or is it just intracameral?
No, since vitreous cavity was clear, I would not give intravitreal.
No. I mean the cases in which it's, they are old, 12 hours or more than that. In such cases.
No. If posterior segment is normal, I rather do not enter in vitreous.
Okay, Dr. Aarti, please continue.
So my one more question I have is, you said your patient was 15-year-old. So what about the consent? Would you like to tell us something about the procedure you take consent in this patient?
Consent is actually, obviously he is a minor, so consent was taken from his parents, and there is a standard format. Actually, AIOS has compiled a very good consent forms, and everyone should go with those consent form. And for each case, you have to modify consent form as per the scenario. So, actually, this is a case of injury, so you have to ask for the MLC also, medical legal cases, but just for your documentation.
Okay. And would you like to tell us for our audience, would you like to tell us the principle of wound management in cases of corneal tear?
Yeah.
When the limbus is involved and when the limbus is not involved?
Yeah. Since this is a case limited up to the limbus, the wound was not crossed the limbus. If the wound is like crossing the limbus, you have to take sutures. You have to secure the limbus first with the 9-0 nylon or 8-0 nylon. And for the corneal suturing, I give 10-0 nylon sutures. And it is usually 90% of depth. Periphery, you can take longer and deep sutures. And as you approach towards the center, you have to take shallow and close short length sutures just to get the proper contour of cornea.
Okay, Dr. Rajat.
Also, if it is crossing, if the tear is crossing the limbus, then you have to do a localized peritomy, conjunctival peritomy, to assess the scleral tear also. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Dr. Rajat, I think you wanted to comment something.
Yeah, Dr. Aarti touched a very good point on consent. I would just tell, this is regarding all the consents, whether it is for cataract, for LASIK, for FFA, for chalazion, whatever. We just heard about the multiple webinars going on these days. So there was a webinar on the medical legal aspects of ophthalmology. And one of the advocates told us that any consent, for whatever reason it is, you have to give a copy of the consent to the patient. And on your consent, you have to get it written that he has received the copy. Now, I don't know how much practically feasible it is, or if in a busy OPD, busy OT, how much times you can do it. But this was one point which was brought about in the courts in some case, that the patient did not know what he has signed, and he was never given a copy for the same. So now when the clinic starts opening again, probably tomorrow, so what we'll be starting in our practice is we'll be giving a consent of whatever we do, a duplicate to the patient, and get it signed on our consent that he has been given the copy. Probably get a stamp made. The copy has been received by me or Hindi mein, aur uske upar stamp laga ke and get a signed by him.
Yeah.
So that is what we told is very important.
Yeah, it's very good point. Yeah.
Actually, this is what is practiced in UK, that the patient should receive a consent a week before surgery so that they have time to read it and understand it.
For the emergency cases, we don't have that much more time.
But probably this comment on consent was in general this one scenario.
Rather, I think in coming days, video consent is will play a major role in coming days, I feel.
It's always better.
Yeah. Dr. Aditi, the tissue looks quite edematous. You think you would have started the sutures in the periphery and gone ahead in the center, or you would have proceeded as Dr. Yogesh has done?
No, I would have done the way he has done. Okay. And as he mentioned very correctly, that it is not approaching the limbus. And just one doubt, what was the lens status?
Yeah, lens was clear. It was examined intraoperatively, for just tilting the head. The lens was clear. So the anterolenticular the capsular breach was not there. So there was no like localized cataract formation.
Cataract. Right, sir. And as I would just like to add, even in the consent, many of the times we do see in such patients, the kids do come up with cataract, maybe because of the trauma or even after we are starting them on topical steroids. So maybe in the consent, we used to write that chances of cataract, multiple surgery, and all that. We can add that. And I do agree with Dr. Aarti, maybe I wouldn't have done the pre-op ultrasound. Though I totally understand that. I think what sir meant was because it was with the glass particle, right, sir? The trauma was with glass, so he wanted to exclude anything. So in our center, what we do is we do not do the pre-op ultrasound. We do the primary repair and then we do the imaging later on.
Yes.
After the primary repair.
Yes, that is also fine.
Okay, Dr. Yogesh, if the capsule had been breached in this case, the anterior and the posterior, would your management would have changed?
Yes, definitely. But it depends on the, like suppose for the first scenario, like the capsule is breached, anterior capsule is breached, I will examine how much breach is there. If it is small, then I will not do the lens clearing procedure because the small breach itself seal and it can cause subcapsular cataract.
Okay, how do you define small?
Small, it's like a linear breach, like 2 to 3 millimeters. It will seal itself, and you have to see for the cortical matters present in the AC. If cortical matters are present in the AC, definitely you have to give a wash and you have to remove you have to clean the capsular bag. And for the posterior breach, definitely you have to do entire lensectomy.
Okay, so any posterior breach you go with lensectomy, then would you go ahead with a primary lens implantation or a secondary one? If you're going with a primary, how do you calculate the IL power?
Right, that's a good question. So the lens implantation depends mainly on the capsular support. If I have a good capsular support, then I will go with the lens implantation. And I'll take power from the fellow eye. Actually, I'll take K1, K2 from the fellow eye, axial length from the fellow eye, and then I'll go with the lens implantation, provided in mentioning consent that he may require multiple surgeries or IL exchange in future.
Okay. Dr. Aditya, what is your experience with such cases in the scenario where the posterior or the anterior capsular is breached?
See, basically the point is whenever you are dealing with any case of anterior segment trauma, it is always ready. It's a good idea to be ready with your vitrectomy because sometimes it is very difficult, especially for example, this case of which Dr. Yogesh has shown. The wound is so edematous, you can't really make out what is below it.
Yes.
Whether the capsule is breached, obviously there is no lens matter in the AC, but still it's difficult to say Especially in a penetrating trauma, the capsule could have been breached, and you go inside, you find vitreous in the anterior chamber. So one point is always be prepared with your vitrectomy. And regarding lens power implant, simultaneous procedure as is the cataract extraction and this, I would defer it. I would definitely defer it, especially the visual axis is involved. Because the biometry is never good. The power keeps on changing as the wound heals with time and when you remove the sutures.
Right.
If it's like a small tear in the periphery and, for example, the lens is also involved in some way or the other, the capsule is breached rather, not just a cataract. So you may go with a simultaneous procedure, but otherwise a staged procedure is always good.
Yes.
And two more things is where you don't see, please don't inject. Because a B-scan in the open globe trauma is always a controversial topic.
Yes.
So if you are not doing it because of the open globe injury, please do not inject. Even if the wound is contaminated, simply because if there is a choroidal detachment or a localized RD and you're in the wrong space, you will end up worsening the posterior segment. And the other point which Yogesh has shown is that AC formation in these cases is extremely tricky. So he has gone through the wound and injected viscoelastic. So for the beginners who are dealing with trauma and in the early stages of their career, please be very careful when you inject any fluid through the wound, especially one with the edematous edges, because there is always a chance you may end up creating a DMD there. At the edge of the wound where the edema is maximum, from there the fluid wave can just progress and cause a DMD. So if you want to form the AC through the wound, be very careful and use a 27 gauge cannula which you use for viscoat. So that cannula is thinner and causes a lesser trauma to the wound, rather than a usual cannula which was shown.
Yes.
Fantastic. Dr. Aarti and Dr. Aditi, I think I'll throw two questions at both of you. If there was a tissue loss in such a case, how would you have managed? I mean, only a small gap would have remained. What would you have done, especially in a scenario like today when no tissues are available? And you think there would have, a purse string suture would have been a choice in this case? Okay, Dr. Aditi, you may go ahead first.
Sorry, the last part I couldn't hear.
Okay, purse string suture, and in the scenario where there is a tissue loss, how would you have managed in today's scenario?
Primary aim remains the same: close the wound, take tighter sutures, purse string suture, whatever. Every case of trauma, I think one thing is theory and one thing is when we are sitting in the OR and managing the case. And if there is no tissue, it becomes really tricky. But again, I would like to primarily close the wound, take up for the ultrasound the next time, and plan the secondary, management after that. Not in the same sitting.
Okay.
As I mentioned that we do not do pre-op ultrasound.
I think the principle remains the same. The challenge here is that you've given a scenario when the tissue is lost. Probably, I don't know what I would have done.
Okay.
Maybe Dr. like Karan, I was just coming. Maybe Karan can tell us.
Karan, what would you do in case there is still a leaking wound?
Definitely, Karan can answer that.
There is a very leaky wound over here. First of all, you have to remember the aim of any corneal tear or a conjunctival tear is not to prevent damage to the lens or whatever that we plan. It is to prevent the iatrogenic damage to the retina. Retina is the one that you have to prevent. So coming to that, what was the question? I forgot.
If there is a leaky wound, even after the suturing because of tissue loss, how would you manage?
See, first of all, if there's a lot of tissue loss, then you have to do a patch graft. You can combine it with a patch graft. But remember one thing is, if there's not much of tissue thing, you have to put tight sutures. Still it's leaking, you can always apply a sinoacryl implant. So that is one option that goes very well. One more point I would like to add is, for the beginners that are over here, is always bury your sutures, particularly the new ones. It's extremely important. And then after that, you always put a BCL. I think everybody, any deviance from this? Does anybody disagree?
Dr. Jatin?
You have to bury suture.
Yeah.
Your expert comments, please.
No, there were a few things that I noticed when he started. First of all, the minute he started his examining the wound, he held it with a tooth forceps. Never hold the edges of the wound with any forceps that are stood, because you can cheese wire the wound.
Yes.
And that can make the wound worse. If you want to examine how it is, whether the edges are vertically cut or they are shelved edges, you can possibly pass a blunt instrument and see through that. Second, I would have still gone ahead first securing the periphery than the center. Because if you're looking at trying to maintain the topography of the cornea as best as you can, it's always better that you start with the center and divide your wounds into every half. And the central sutures were still quite long. They could have been shorter. Okay. Third, he entered again through the wound. Howsoever shallow your AC is, you can go parallel to your iris and make a side port and enter through the side port. Never enter through the wound at all. I would have not entered even with a smaller cannula, because not just the risk of DMD, you are actually making the edges not approximate properly in that way. Because see, as it is, the wound is edematous. Any intervention entering through the tear is going to really affect it. Use a sharp knife, use a sharp NVR, make a entry as a side port which is parallel to your iris plane, and you can easily manipulate from that. So these 3 points is something that I would have really taken care of, and like I would have divided each segment into halves and then gone ahead with the suturing, because that's how actually a suturing would be ideally to be done. And you have to see to it that the distance between the two sutures is exactly the diagonal is something that is showing an overlap, which eventually he had. I mean, that's how the wound became watertight. I do always put an air bubble like he did, but yeah, before that, it's important to see that the wound is watertight, because see, air bubble can give a very pseudo impression that the wound is formed, and the next day, once the air is gone, you may still see the AC has become flat. So first, secure your wound, see to that it's a watertight wound, and then regarding whether to do a lensectomy or not, or how do you handle when there is a lens injury, when there is cortical matter in AC, minimal lenticular intervention is what is important. See, the aim is to close your eye. Okay. If there is lens matter in the AC, if you see cortical matter, clear only whatever is visible. Don't go anywhere beyond what is visible to you, because you don't want to land up intervening and entering into the vitreous cavity. You don't want vitreous to prolapse. You don't want to really go closer to vitreous, because you are that way going to increase the chances of endophthalmitis, because you want to preserve the anatomy of the lens as much as possible. It doesn't matter if there's a little cortical matter left behind, because once the edema settles, a couple of days having the cortical matter in the eye would really not harm as much. It'll just possibly have a little more inflammation to the eye. It's better to have an inflamed eye than an infected eye. It's easier to handle an inflamed eye than an infected eye. So whatever is visible, just intervene in that much area. Don't need to be any way heroic. I would never do a primary setting IOL implantation in these cases, because you again don't know what is the status. It may land up having a secondary infection later on. You really don't want to really be very aggressive in those cases at that point of time. Aim is to close the eye. That's the most important thing. You have to close the eye. Yeah, Karan.
Okay. Dr. Jatin, when...
Let me just... One question I forgot to get back getting back to the basics. The first step is the block. Okay. So I have one question to the panelists over here. See, general anesthesia is always referred. Okay. Not available. So local anesthesia you're giving. Now, would you be giving via a 26 gauge needle or a 24 gauge or a 23 gauge needle, 24 gauge needle?
It really doesn't matter. You can see it's on your expertise. If you're okay giving the 24 gauge needle, it's perfectly fine. You can always combine this with a facial block. See, ultimately, if the patient has analgesia and is not going to squeeze, that's all that you want. So that's more important. You can give with any needle. Yeah, possibly if you're giving a peribulbar, or you can add a facial so that you have a little less squeezing of their eyelids. That's more important at that point of time.
I think one more trick is that, you have to give a slow block, a very slow block.
Yeah. You can give extremely slowly so that it becomes much better for us to handle, because you don't want things to expulse out of the eye at that point of time. And most important is explain the patient that they may have a little pain, even because you may not be able to do a good anesthesia to the patient at that point of time. You have to talk to the patient. See, a lot of patients who are young adults, they do cooperate if you tell them that they may experience a little pain and discomfort at the time of surgery. And that's what makes a lot of difference when we're really looking at these patients.
One more thing is, apart in tears not as extensive as this case, subtenon's block also works quite well.
Yes.
If it's a very small tear, even a topical would work in these patients.
Yes.
If it's a very small peripheral tear and a patient is cooperative, you can do even under topical anesthesia.
Topical, yes.
Yeah, I remember in Africa, I was posted in Africa and I had a blowout, not a blowout fracture. Patient had undergone PKP 1 month back, and he got into a gang fight and landed up with the entire graft hanging over his lid at 12 o'clock in the night. No anesthetist ready to travel in the night in a place like Mozambique. And I had to do the entire PKP under topical. It was horrible, but eventually he improved to 624. Best corrective visual acuity 624. It was, I can remember, yeah, we can do it under topical, but only if we don't have any other choice. Actually, quite a few viewers are asking whether can we do it under topical.
Not this kind of a case, definitely not.
A smaller one.
A smaller one can definitely be taken up.
Facial is the key.
Facial is something that would really help in these patients. You really have to.
One question for the panelists over here. Dr. Yogesh has mentioned, I think it's a must to give intracameral moxifloxacin post these sort of cases. So the conditions that I have two questions over here for the panelists. First question is, would you be giving, if you are suspecting a posterior segment involvement of the infection or something, would you be giving intravitreal in the same setting? Second question is, if it's a clean case, would you be giving intracameral 0.1 ml of dexamethasone as you would be giving it in framed eyes or uveitic eye or something like that? Would you be giving that?
There are two questions that you have asked, basically. One is regarding the intravitreal. Okay. See, if it's a definite case where you are having an infection and you already know that there's an infective pathology, it makes sense to give an intravitreal injection. Unless you really know there's an infective pathology existing, I would not give an intravitreal injection. Like already Aditya has told, don't do anything don't enter a space which is not seen to you. So we don't want to really go into a wrong space or give a suprachoroidal injection or maybe something below the retina and just swell of the retina more. Yeah, intracameral is still a safe bet because a lot of us are now even giving intracameral moxifloxacin post-cataract surgery. Steroid is just anyone's choice. I would still not give intracameral steroids in these cases because we don't know whether they will infect the next day or the third day. So I would still possibly only give an intracameral moxifloxacin injection. That's it I would do. See, minimum intervention is what is important. Your aim is only one. You have to close the eye, restore the anatomy. You don't have to do anything heroic in these cases at this point of time. You are really taking the consent that we are closing your eye. Even for smaller ones, peripheral ones, your consent is always that we are trying to restore anatomy. We don't know about the function. We don't know whether it's going to get infected later on. So be very clear about your interventional goal. You are trying to just approximate the wound edges. You are trying to maintain the globe in as far as possible the normal position. That's all that you want to do. Anything to do with vision can always be secondary. It's important to save the eye than the vision at that point of time. You can always get the vision with any of the other modalities later on.
Yes.
Most important is talking to the patient and the relatives because it's a state when there's a lot of anxiety in these patients.
Yes.
So you really have to talk to them a lot because people in our country, unfortunately, despite having explained everything, that you may not gain vision, they will come back to you a week post-operatively and ask you, when will I start seeing? So it's very, very important that every visit and every time and every relative of theirs, you emphasize the fact that this is not being done for vision, which is very important. You have to talk in front of their relatives the same thing. See, a lot of people say, don't tell this in front of the patient because you don't want him to be depressed. But this is something that is extremely important to safeguard us because they will immediately forget and then they will come back to you a week later and say, you promised he'll get 50% vision. See, you may say there is a 50% prognosis, but they consider prognosis is equal to the visual acuity. So be very careful about what you are talking to the patient. Never use anything in terms of percentage. Don't promise any percentage to the patient.
Yeah,
Just
that is the
very
first
clear.
question they ask. Kitna percent dikhega mujhe?
Because patients are going to ask you how much. And even if you prognosticate in percentage, they would take it as visual acuity in terms of percentage. Don't speak any numbers. This is extremely important. No numbers. You have to be very clear that we are only going to close your eye.
I'll just add one more thing over here, sir, that, it's very important. I always tell my residents and fellows, do not use the word GVP. use the word visual prognosis. This is extremely important because GVP can also mean good visual prognosis.
Yes. So patients are not going to understand our medical languages. So you have to be very clear about talking to them. You have extremely, see, your counseling for the surgery can really get postponed by half an hour. That's fine. Even if you have to lose this patient and patient says that you are not giving guarantee, I don't want to get operated by you, it's perfectly fine. See, a lot of patients ask for a guarantee, and most of these patients will ask you a guarantee. Be very clear, there is no guarantee. I mean, it's really good a lot of times to lose these patients. I know on humanitarian grounds, I may sound really bad, but see, the minute patients come with the word guarantee to you, they are going to cause trouble to you in future, because a lot of these things may be domestic violence, they may be alleged fights, they may be medical legal cases as well, because that is one aspect you cannot forget. Yeah. Any case can even drive you to a court even after 10 years or 12 years when you have forgotten about the patient. So these are very, very important things whenever you're dealing with trauma. No, never forget to take the MLC. If the patient says, I don't want to register an MLC, please get it written that they are not interested in registering an MLC. See, getting the MLC registered or not registered is not just a patient's choice. It's also a doctor's choice. Even though the patient says no, and if you think it's a foul play, you can inform the police. See, it's a patient can give a statement that it was whatever statement he wants to give, that no, this was just, it just happened by itself. It's very important we play safe, because tomorrow, even though the patient writes on paper that I did not want to do an MLC, they may go ahead with an MLC even after a month, 2 months, 3 months. You never know. So it's our duty to safeguard our interest. We have to still, if you think there is some issue with this, be very clear to the patient that you want to register it as an MLC. I mean, because anything written by a paper, on the paper by a patient, they can always refuse that the doctor told me to write this and I wrote it. So you have to be very safe when you're dealing with these patients, because you don't know what has gone wrong with them.
Right.
Can I just add one thing?
Okay.
Yes,
yeah, so wonderfully explained. And the examination of the other eye for all our juniors.
Yes.
First time when the patient is presenting, even at the follow-up, penetrating injury, whatever, please examine the other eye and mention it. You don't want to land up with, losing the other eye as well with a sympathetic ophthalmia or something like that. Okay, just to add. Everything else Saurabh has excellently explained.
Okay. Many of the audience questions have already been addressed, I guess. Karan, are there any questions on Facebook?
Just looking, just a second. Somebody has asked, can you use a partial thickness scleral flap, or can you use a partial thickness scleral tissue like a patch graft?
Partial thickness scleral flaps have their roles when you're looking at something like a trapdoor thing that you want to do. See, if you have a scleral tear which is not getting approximated, you can do something like a trapdoor where you can use a partial thickness. Sclera on the cornea is really something that you really don't want to have. You can use Steenens instead, or a conjunctival graft instead. You don't want sclera on the cornea.
See, I was in a discussion with Dr. Fogla yesterday, and he has said right now, if you by chance, Karan, get hold of any, or you're in a group, so any of you get hold of any cornea, right? So it is extremely important.
Your voice was not clear, was breaking up. Can
you mute Dr. Kundan, please?
Yeah, Dr. Kundan, can you mute your mic, please?
Yeah. So I was talking to Dr. Fogla yesterday. We were part of a group that were discussing, and he said, if you get hold of a tissue, don't, let it go right now. If you use the rim, if you use the cornea, save the scleral rim. It's in the cornea, it's anywhere, just bloody use it now.
Yes.
My language, but just use it wherever you can, just save whatever you can. That's extremely important, particularly in these COVID times.
See, even not these times, I always preserve whatever is left. So whenever I do a transplant, the rim and the top head of a DSEC, I always keep it for about 4 to 5 weeks, because somehow, sometime or the other, you might end up using that tissue in emergency cases. Even if you have a tissue, suppose a patient comes to you today, he has a perforation in the center, you can't wait for the tissue to come next day. So you just apply something and close it. So whenever, even if the COVID times go away and we have a lot of tissues and Dr. Jatin starts providing a lot of tissues from his biobank as well, even then I would suggest that you know, preserve whatever is possible. If you are supposed to throw it after 3 weeks. What is there in that?
Rajat, I could provide you only if you were in Maharashtra. Unfortunately, I cannot, even if I want to, even if I collect a lot. How do you preserve them? Do you keep them in the same MK, and do you keep them in the fridge, or you keep them in the freezer? This is what is important, because I would really vary to keep it in the fridge. If I'm keeping the same MK, I would possibly freeze it, because I would be a little concerned about the infection if I'm looking at more than 14 days, because if you're MK, it's just 4 days. I mean, we are more worried about the infection setting in this scenario, because these media are no longer effective after that. So you can just freeze them instead.
Yeah, that's correct. So what I normally do is I only keep them in the refrigerator. All the tissues are mostly in cortisol. So 21 days is fine. But again, what your concern is about the infection is absolutely correct. I am also wary of the infection that can take place in the tissue. One thing that serves as a surrogate marker is the color of the MK media. So if and when I'm supposed to use it, I would definitely look at the color of the MK media, how it is. But yes, I am taking a risk of spreading the infection there. But then those tissues are used only when there are dry emergencies. I would always prefer a fresh tissue if available than using a probably older tissue or rim.
I guess now we should start looking at cryo also for our patients' tissues, because that's going to keep these tissues for a longer time. We may have to start looking at these things.
So I have one more question for the panel over here. To complete the discussion on corneoscleral tears that we're doing, what if you have a tear which you can't reach? Suppose, if there's a scleral tear, you have to dissect under the conjunctiva. You're suspecting a limbal tear, you should dissect under the conjunctiva and look for that. Now, what if that tear is extending beyond the equator? So what is your management going to be in that sort of a case?
Rajat would take it up, I guess.
Yeah, so my wife is a retina surgeon. So what she tells me, I'll tell you that. So what she tells me is that if the tear is extending 5 millimeters beyond the limbus, she would always put a band. She would always put a prophylactic band to prevent a subsequent RD future. And then obviously, if it is going behind the recti, you disinsert the recti and try to suture it as much as possible. But a prophylactic band is something which she always tells me I can't put it. What she says is she'll put it always if it is extending beyond 5 millimeters from the limbus.
Okay, on the note of not having tissues, and since I just spoke about cryo, there are a few people who do smile and they are preserving the lenticle that they have removed on a cryo. So we could possibly get in touch with those people to help us out in such dire situations with those lenticles. They may help us at this moment. So if that's somewhere in your city that somebody is doing that, we may possibly use that. Yeah, Karan, you can say.
So there's a Facebook question over here that somebody has asked. First, we have not discussed one thing: is the management post a tissue adhesive? Whether to give aqueous suppressants or not. That's the question that everybody, PG or a fellow generally asks. Is this so? Somebody has asked over here: any role of aqueous suppressants for early and proper healing?
Okay, so the goal of as of now, when we have not secured the wound, the AC is flat, IOP is low. First thing what I want is the AC to be formed. For the AC to be formed, the aqueous has to come out. So in the first initial few days, I would resist using the aqueous suppressant. I would want the aqueous to be formed so that the AC is formed. Now, suppose all goes well, and 3 to 5 days after the wound is closed, the AC is formed. Probably then I would see the digital pressure and then titrate it accordingly. But for the first few days, I would definitely not give a aqueous suppressant because I want the aqueous to form. Now, as regards the other treatment is concerned, this was clinically a HSV keratitis case. So what I did post-op was a tablet is acyclovir 5 times a day, 400 milligrams for 21 days. A tablet, oral steroids I gave 50 milligram once a day. Antacids, antibiotic steroids, 6 times a day antibiotic steroids, and a homide 3 times a day. That's what my treatment was.
So since you just spoke about the postgraduates, just to summarize for the postgraduates about the HSV, if it's an epithelial disease, just give plain ointment of acyclovir. There is no role of adding anything else in those patients. Okay, you don't need to give them oral antivirals if it's an epithelial disease. Only if you have a stromal disease, that's when you would add an oral acyclovir, which is given as 400 milligram 5 times a day for the way Rajat told, as 2 weeks, along with this thing. if you have a combined disease wherein you would still want the epithelium to heal before you start your steroids, unless it's an immunological process that you are seeing, wherein despite the epithelial defect, you would add on steroids to these patients. Okay. Oral steroids is only given when there is a uveitic situation along with your HSV. I would not give oral steroids to these patients otherwise. I mean, there are specific AO guidelines, and there is a AO preferred practice pattern on management of HSV eye disease. So I guess most of the PGs can go through that, which is nicely explained about in which stage of the disease what has to be given. There's no role of any antibiotic in these cases otherwise. So if it's a definitive HSV pathology, you don't need to give moxifloxacin or any other antibiotics to these patients at all. Anything else, Rajat, that you would want to add?
Whatever I do has been taught to me by you.
Would any of
I have forgotten a lot of things. You're much fresher than what I am.
you still seem to remember than compared to all of us, more than all of us, in fact.
Not really.
Dr. Indravid, you can take up some questions on Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah, Aditya sent the link about the HSV infection guidelines, and they are the very good guidelines. I mean, they are the American Academy guidelines. They shared them, and I guess everybody should follow them religiously, because these are the best that you have.
Okay. Just two more things I think we'll say before closing up. First is Dr. Aditya had commented about the consent, which was in continuation. Actually, he got interrupted in between. He wanted to talk about the free consent, I guess. Aditya, can you summarize it fast? I think we are nearing the end of our session. So.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Aditya.
So what I was trying to tell about the consent is that if a consent has to be given by a child, firstly, it has to be, obviously the child is going to be accompanied with the guardian or the parent. So the signature has to be of the parent or the guardian. And if a consent is given and you have a consent form with you, which is obviously there with every doctor, that consent form should contain the word free consent. Because if a consent is given, it can always be said, as discussed by Dr. Karan, that it is due to the undue influence of the doctor. Later, it can be said that it is due to the undue influence of the doctor. The doctor told me to do it. This is the way to do it. And then it can be taken legally also.
Okay. Okay, fine. So I think we have discussed enough, and I think we have come to the end of it's almost 1.5 hours. So I think we'll wrap up. If any of the panelists have anything to say, pardon?
I have one question, it's very important to take this question, because it's a very common question that somebody has asked. If bone injury, corneal tear is there, should we avoid topical steroid after repair? So this is a very important question. Can somebody take that up? Dr. Yogesh, I think you can take it up.
Yeah, just a minute. So if there is a wooden injury, I will not start topical steroid from the day one itself. I'll wait for at least for 48 to 72 hours. I'll observe the wound. If it is not infecting, then only I'll start with the topical steroid. Rather, I will not give topical steroids. Instead, I'll give sometimes, if there is inflammation is more, but no infective pathology, it looks like on the clinical examination, I'll give topical NSAIDs in those cases for initial days. Or even we can give, we can apply topical ointment of tacrolimus to control the inflammation in a case of suspecting fungal infection post-operatively or because of the wooden injury. Anybody can comment on this. So
Dr. Kunal?
Is open.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Yogesh, because with wooden injury, there are chances of fungal keratitis. So better to wait for at least 2 to 3 days to see how the wound responds. even if the wound is clear wound with no infection, it's better to give it a day to see the response. And then after slit lamp examination, we can start topical steroids.
Even after starting steroid, like after 2 to 3 days, you need close monitoring for these cases because fungus is like a notorious bug. It can emerge like from anywhere. So you have to follow very closely once you start steroids.
Okay. So I think we can wrap it up, call it a night. It was a nice and detailed discussion. Thank you all of you, panelists and the viewers, for being here. Thank you, Dr. Jatin, Dr. Rajat, for really an enlightening session. Both of you really taught us a lot, I guess. Thank you, Dr. Kunal, Dr. Aditya, Dr. Yogesh, Aditi, Arti, and of course, Dr. Devkant, who seems to be missing. Okay,
I'm
he's
here.
Okay. Yeah, you're here. Yeah.
No, many thanks to
The last
Devkant
minute
for your free access to your paid Zoom account. All of us.
Without you, this would not have been possible.
Yeah, so I mean, it would have been possible without any of us, but not without you.
Yes. That's why I bought this.
Okay, so I think we'll close the session, and I would request the panelists to stay back and rest of the people can log out.
I'll just stop the live stream, okay?